if we are willing to stand up and stop horrific things like child abuse and like so-called gender-affirming care.
So if right-wingers were worried about stopping child abuse, they would look into the Catholic Church. You would want to look into the rates of child marriage in red states and the fact that child marriage laws are still allowed in a variety of red states. You would want to look into the rates of child abuse in areas where abstinence-only sex ed is taught and all these kinds of things. The fact that Republicans are in favor of that as well. You would want to look into your friend Matt Gaetz, who is literally currently being federally investigated for the trafficking of a minor. You would want to look into that. But because Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't give a shit about any of that, and she only cares about getting power, and she wants to actively create conditions where trans people suffer, that's literally it. So as is customary on this channel, it's a lot of stuff going on in the world, a lot of very important things happening all at once. Some have a level, a degree, some may say of importance more than others. But you can focus on multiple things at once, ideally if you're not completely deranged. So as it would turn out, there's a new article, a new study published from First Street Foundation, August 15, 2022, about highlights from hazardous heat. There's new research from First Street Foundation analyzes the prevalence of increasing extreme temperatures and dangerous heat wave events throughout the contiguous United States, with the key finding being the incidence of heat that exceeds the threshold of the National Weather Service's highest category for heat called extreme danger, heat index above 125 degrees Fahrenheit. It's expected to impact about 8 million people this year and grows to impact about 107 million people in 2053, an increase of 13 times over 30 years. This increase in quote-unquote extreme danger days is concentrated in the middle of the country, in areas where there are no coastal influences to mitigate extreme temperatures. So if we look at that chart here, it would seem that the southern United States and the Midwestern United States are going to be getting rolled. But not just that, but also apparently a lot of the East Coast. Because for some reason, the East Coast, and by some reason, I mean, it's obvious, the East Coast is the least coast, the West Coast is the best coast. East Coast's going to be a lot hotter than the West Coast, though, I mean, every place is getting messed up. It's all bad. So you're going to see, a migration from a bunch of people in the southern states toward the north, the areas around the Great Lakes, and also the coastal areas that aren't going to be as affected in the United States. So while that's happening, of course, a lot of these southern states are run by Republicans and are more or less just not even trying to do anything about climate change. In fact, exacerbating the problem, actively making it worse, as well as also being the biggest recipients for government handouts and welfare because they don't know how to govern. Republicans. They hate everybody else and themselves, and they only care about getting money from big donors. So these states are already in disrepair, and they're going to be rocked by extreme heat, which is going to cause people to want to leave if they can. So while all this is happening, Florida getting absolutely booty blasted here, Texas, the cheeks are being spread and clapped, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, all these southern states getting absolutely rolled. And now it's not just that, because, it got Arizona, California as well, but the majority is the southern conservative red states. So while that's happening, luckily we've got people on the case. We've got a MAGA nominee for Missouri, Governor Tudor Dixon. Completely suspicious name. I would not trust anybody named that. What the hell is that? Is asked why she's against a 14-year-old rape victim being allowed to get an abortion. So, she's too busy talking about how when they're forced to give birth to those children after being victims of rape, that it'll help them heal, apparently, is what she's saying, which is completely absurd. But, Republicans, they got to occupy their time in some way. So what better way to do it than to tacitly defend rapists? Why not? Standard right-wing politics in this country. You also got a woman in Louisiana who's being forced to carry a fetus without a skull to term because she cannot access an abortion. It'll be dead on delivery because abortion is banned. She's being forced to carry a corpse for 6 more months. Roe v. Wade kept us from stories like these every day. Thank God for that. Republicans really got their eye on the ball, forcing people to carry dead babies to term, even though an abortion would be a more humane situation for the person who's going to give birth to this dead child. And also, thank God, the biggest problem facing our country, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is the biggest problem facing our country, but has also decided to introduce what is called the quote-unquote Protect Children's Innocence Act. So, as you could expect, it's just advocacy for child abuse from Marjorie Taylor Greene. Classic, really. She's a big fan of child abuse. She advocates for it on the regular, and now we got a bill that's been put forward that's going to do that, which is neat. So thank God for that. Essentially, this bill is meant to amend Chapter 110 of Title 18 of United States Code to prohibit gender-affirming care on minors and for other purposes. And this essentially would make following the medical and scientific consensus and standards of care as it pertains to trans people, trans youth included, it would make that, I believe, a Class C felony to follow those standards of care, which is, you know, I don't know exactly like what else you could do, what else you could say about this. It's literally just a mandate to make it so that trans people can't exist. And of course, we've got such classic lovers of children, Matt Gaetz, co-sponsoring this bill. Thank God for that. The guy under federal investigation for alleged trafficking of a minor. Pretty cool. Whoa! I ended the segment a little bit ago, but look at this shit. Wow, would you look at that? Matt Gaetz' ex-girlfriend testifies to grand jury in sex trafficking probe. The development suggests the Department of Justice may be moving closer to indicting the Florida Republican. Matt Gaetz' ex-girlfriend testified Wednesday before a federal grand jury investigating him for sex crimes, a major development that suggests the Department of Justice may be moving closer to indicting him. The ex-girlfriend, whose name is being withheld by NBC News to respect her privacy, has been in talks for months with prosecutors about an immunity deal. Under a possible deal, she would avoid prosecution for obstruction of justice in return for testifying in the investigation into whether Gaetz in 2017 had sex with a 17-year-old female for money, whether months later he and others violated a federal law prohibiting people from transporting others across state lines to engage in prostitution. Legal sources familiar with the case say Gaetz is being investigated for 3 distinct crimes: sex trafficking, 17-year-old, and violating the Mann Act, which prohibits taking women across state lines for prostitution, and obstructing justice. Well, that doesn't seem too good. Anyway. So she went on Tucker Carlson to talk about this new bill. So let's see what's up here. I haven't seen this yet.
So why is the sexual mutilation of children, the sterilization of children, legal? No one in the Congress seems to be asking that. No one did until Marjorie Taylor.
Yeah, because nobody in Congress, until now, I guess, is fucking stupid enough to believe that that's actually happening. Because it's not. Study after study shows that the standards of care as it pertains to the treatment of gender dysphoria and other related trans healthcare, even in youth, is massively effective. The regret rate for these are minuscule to the point of being statistically insignificant, and it renders all manner of benefits for the patients involved as well, which is too much for Republicans, for right-wingers, for conservatives, because they hate you and want you to suffer.
Green decided this is worth legislating. She represents Georgia in the U.S. Congress. She joins us with an announcement about new legislation pending. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming on. So what do you plan to do about this?
Well, I find this absolutely appalling, Tucker. And, you know, the whole reason why I ran for Congress in the first place is because I'm one of the Americans that are sick and tired of our government allowing the abuse of the American people. But when it comes to gender-affirming care,
which, by the way, we're beating a dead horse at this point, but she's literally done nothing to actually help any average Americans within her tenure in the House of Representatives. In fact, she's voted against all manner of bills, with the end result being that more and more Americans suffer. Classic, really. It's a Republican. Shocking.
But when it comes to gender-affirming care, which is really child abuse.
So, to say that gender-affirming care is so-called child abuse is literally just projection in this context. We've talked about this on the channel before. The standards of care, the medical and scientific consensus about the treatment of gender dysphoria and other related trans healthcare topics, even in youth, is that medical transition, hormones, puberty blockers, eventually any kind of surgeries or other procedures end up being beneficial to the patients and decreases rates of depression, decreases rates of suicidality. So to say that it's so-called child abuse to allow for that, the medical consensus, is just projection, because what this bill would actually do by essentially allowing trans people to exist a Class C felony would detransition every single person who's going to be affected by this bill and was already getting gender-affirming care, which, if this is happening to a child, then becomes child abuse because it contradicts the consensus in the medical community and also contradicts the positive results that this care renders to the patients involved. But that's what they have to do. It's also why Tucker Carlson starts the segment saying that, oh my God, the mutilation of children, blah, 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 blah. No children are getting gender confirmation surgeries. This is not happening. It is a boogeyman lie that they prop up to scare people. Because in the mind of a stupid-ass conservative, the idea is, oh, a child says, oh, I'm a boy, but I think I might actually be a girl. What they think happens then is that the parent immediately takes them to a doctor. The doctor, within 5 minutes, cuts the fucking child's genitals off, and then they get sent on their way. This doesn't happen. It literally has never happened. It does not happen like this. The way it usually is that the child would be like, yo, I was born a boy, but I think I might be a girl. Usually what'll happen, especially if it's a Republican and conservative parent, is that that parent will abuse their child emotionally, physically, or even kick them out of the house. But if they're not abusive pieces of shit like a lot of conservative parents are, then they will take the child to medical and mental health professionals. The child will be analyzed, looked at for a period of usually years to see if that gender nonconforming behavior, these kinds of, questioning of their gender persists over time. Eventually, if it turns out that they are actually trans, then they get on hormone therapy and they go from there. If not, they're taken off the puberty blocker. They go through a puberty that's either around the time that they would have anyway, or is a little bit later than they would have anyway, which renders virtually zero negative consequence. And then after that, time goes on. Eventually, those patients might be interested in getting any kind of cosmetic or other surgeries as it pertains to gender-affirming care, and then you go from there. That's literally the actual reality. That's factual information. If you actually want to live in the reality that we do and engage with it, and you aren't scared of it like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson are, that's actually what is happening. That's actually how that works. But of course, these people don't like the reality we live in because it scares them, it makes them uncomfortable, and because they're little bitch baby snowflakes, they have to try to force their delusions onto everybody else through this kind of anti-trans propaganda, and it's really sad to see. But, let's continue.
This is actually an assault and it's child abuse. And this practice should never happen. It's so disgusting and appalling, and it's an embarrassment to our country. You see, I'm one of those that believes the Republican Party is only worth being a true party, worth deserving of the people's votes, if we are willing to stand up and stop horrific things like child abuse and like so-called gender-affirming care.
So if right-wingers were worried about stopping child abuse, they would look into the Catholic Church. You would want to look into the rates of child marriage in red states and the fact that child marriage laws are still allowed in a variety of red states. The states with the most child marriage are all Republican-run. You would want to look into the rates of child abuse in areas where abstinence-only sex ed is taught and all these kinds of things. The fact that Republicans are in favor of that as well. You would want to look into the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which would make it so that that story in Ohio of that 10-year-old who was a victim of rape ended up almost having to be forced to carry their rapist baby to term at fucking 10 years old. No 10-year-old is prepared to deal with the physical trauma of that, much less the emotional. Had to go to Indiana to get that abortion. You have to look at that as well. The people that are very excited to vote for people like Roy Moore, who has been literally barred from going to certain malls because he would be harassing sexually and otherwise the girls there, the minors there. You would want to actually investigate that. You would want to look into your friend Matt Gaetz, who is literally currently being federally investigated for the trafficking of a minor, allegedly. You would want to look into that. But because Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't give a shit about any of that, and she only cares about winning elections, getting power, and she wants to actively create conditions where trans people suffer, and not just trans people, black and brown people broadly, poor people, because she hates you. That's literally it. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. The Republican Party hates you. Even if you're a Republican Party voter, I would say they hate you more if you're a Republican Party voter because they don't do anything for you. Unless you're like making $500,000 a fucking year, the only thing they're doing is cutting taxes for the mega wealthy, deregulating corporations, and then literally trying to mandate child abuse at the state level like Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing right now. Like, they're not doing anything for you. They've got nothing.
Which is really genital mutilation. It's puberty blockers.
It's interesting as well, the idea of, genital mutilation. So, of course, right-wingers will always talk about how, in some Muslim countries, they do female genital mutilation, and that's so bad. But they won't say a goddamn thing about circumcision. There was an interesting Ben Shapiro tweet recently here about this. I didn't expect this to come up. So the reason why they bring up female genital mutilation and not male genital mutilation, aka circumcision, is that they want to shit on Muslims. They want to shit on Islam. They want to shit on brown people. That's literally it. They don't bring up circumcision because it's a lot of white people engaging in that. And also there's religious context for it as well. So Andrew Sullivan on Twitter says, I wonder how many people who oppose child sex changes also oppose circumcision. Similar principle to the bodily integrity of children, especially their sex organs. So Ben Shapiro quotes and asks, so your suggestion is that the removal of the foreskin is equivalent to the removal of the penis and testicles, formation of a false body cavity, and a hormonal replacement with opposite sex hormones. This is perhaps the stupidest thing I have ever heard. So I said, of course, in my infinite wisdom, because I'm always right, the difference being for those who aren't clinically brain dead like Ben Shapiro is that circumcision is done literally all the time to children, whereas bottom surgery never is, meaning that chopping off of a child's genitalia for the purposes of gender confirmation is literally never happening. It does not happen. It is a false story brought up by people that want to essentially eliminate trans people from existence. I followed up with only a fundamentally stupid person, like Ben Shapiro, would think the comparison is between the severity of the individual procedures. For youth to be prescribed puberty blockers or HRT requires medical analysis and consent of the patient, whereas circumcision is most commonly done to literal infants. So unless Ben Shapiro and Marjorie Taylor Greene think that literal infants can consent to that kind of a thing, and I mean, if you talk to her friend Matt Gaetz about if, an infant could consent to that kind of thing, might get some weird replies there. That's also genital mutilation. And it happens all the time. And there's no benefit for it either. There's literally no benefit for circumcision. The most commonly thing that will be brought up is, hygiene. Literally just teach your child how to wash themselves. You're golden. That's it. You don't gotta worry about it. So it's curious that they never bring that up. So then we talk about puberty blockers. These people don't even know what puberty blockers is. They don't know how that works. They will never bring up the fact that cis kids are put on puberty blockers for the treatment of precocious puberty, meaning that if they're going through a puberty too early to the point where it would be detrimental to their health, they get put on puberty blockers, then they get taken off them after a certain point, and then they go through puberty at a time that is not going to be detrimental to their health, and that's that. It works the same way with the prescription of puberty blockers for children who have questions about their gender identity and are still trying to figure that out with the aid of medical and mental health professionals, their parents, and themselves.
That cause chemical castration. Teenage girls...
So puberty blockers causing chemical castration? This is also another myth. This is also a thing that people are always bringing up on the right that isn't actually true. If that was the case, then so many cis kids who get put on those puberty blockers would be also chemically castrated. That isn't the case. That hasn't happened. So that's literally just a lie.
Actually having their breasts chopped off. Teenage boys being castrated.
So this is not happening either. There might be some instances of people who are, in many views, too young to be able to having these kinds of things happen, but it's not really happening. At any rate, that really matters. The amount of desistance when it comes to trans people is incredibly low. The amount of regret for those kinds of procedures is also incredibly low, especially when you compare it to the rates of regret for other procedures as it pertains to things like that. So also literally just lies. So we're basing our pro-child abuse bill on literal lies.
It needs to be illegal, and I'm introducing a bill called Protect Children's Innocence Act, and it would create a law that would cause it to be a Class C felony for any person involved in so-called gender-affirming care. That means genital mutilation surgery. That means hormones.
So the question would be, does this bill also outlaw circumcision? Probably not, because that is the most common genital mutilation that happens to children. I'm willing to bet that there is going to be a carve-out for that, an exemption for that one.
That means puberty blockers, anything involving any youth under the age of 18, because these kids are too young to make these awful decisions that will affect them and will be permanent for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, so Marjorie Taylor Greene and other right-wingers and Republicans will be like, oh my God, kids are too young to make this kind of decision. Kids are too young. Well, that's, first of all, that's why they have the medical and mental health professionals that have to analyze the kids and also the parents and also the kids themselves. And this is also why, right-wingers somehow think that kids can't, choose to socially transition because they might be born a girl, but they are actually a boy, like pretty simple. They can't do that. They can't, with the help of literal professionals, go any further than that either. But they definitely are responsible enough. If you are the victim of rape, let's say, at 10, because you always are if you're 10 fucking years old, you are mature enough, you are old enough to be able to give birth to your rapist child. Totally normal ideas coming from the Republican Party. They love to use the word mutilation when they talk about trans people. Yeah, and the reason why they do it is because it's inflammatory. They talk about it in these very grotesque ways, which are completely contradictory to the actual reality of the matter, because it's meant to scare people. It's meant to scare people who don't know anything about trans issues, trans healthcare, into thinking, oh my God, this is what they're doing? little Jimmy says that he's a girl, and then the next day he goes to the doctor and they chop his fucking genitals off? Oh my God, that's so crazy. And the stupid ass motherfuckers that vote for these people are actually willing to believe that because they've been victims of indoctrination, propaganda, lack of funding for their schooling. And, you know, as Trump has always said, they're big fans of the uneducated. He loves the uneducated because they're more willing to vote for Republicans. There's a reason why universities, colleges tend to skew more liberal, because the more you actually learn about objective reality and the facts of the world, the less likely you are to be a conservative. But anyway, all of this is literally counterfactual, counter-science, counter-reality, all meant to whip up votes in the midterms and also just cause suffering to people who are literally just trying to live their lives. That's it. There's no other benefit. They don't care about any of the shit that I've been talking about. All of my debunking of their points, they don't care. All of the actual reality of the matter that I've been talking about, they do not care. I'm still going to make the arguments because I find it necessary so people understand them, and hopefully people on the fence are motivated to become more likely to agree with my position as it is backed up by actual fact, but they don't care about any of that shit. They just want trans people to not exist anymore. That's literally it. That's it. They don't want trans people to exist. Very simple. Very cut. Very clean. So what they will do is they're going to try to ban trans healthcare for minors. They're also going to try to ban trans healthcare for all ages. They're also going to try to outlaw cross-dressing, and that is related to the drag stuff, so that you can't even socially transition, i.e. just wear clothes that they say contradict your gender identity or whatever. They're going to exacerbate conditions that lead to higher rates of depression and suicidality in youth as well as adults, and make them more likely to take their own lives, because them creating conditions that make people more likely to commit suicide is them being nice to you. They're being kind. Them putting you in a position where you think of taking your own life is a kindness from them. Because if they had their way, they would literally just kill you. Like, I'm tired of beating around the bush. It has become abundantly clear. Like, at some point, maybe, there could have been some debate about that, but they simply don't want trans people to exist. We've seen this movie before when it comes to, I don't know, you know, the tired comparison of, say, Germany, you know, some decades ago. We've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. If you look at the stages of genocide as laid out by the Holocaust Museum and a variety of other academics who have studied the Holocaust, you'll notice that we're kind of several steps in on that genocide of trans people that the Republicans and right-wingers want to do, and that's just it. That's it. There's not really any other way to put it. So what needs to be done about this is these people need to not be in positions of power. You've got to mobilize and protest on the ground. You've got to create alternative networks to the current supply chain, build dual power, organize in your communities, and all this kind of shit. Hopefully, if you want to engage with electoralism, obviously vote for the least bad option in the general, which is going to be the Democrats. Vote for the best option in the primary, which is going to be a Democrat as well, until we can move past the first past the post system and third parties are viable, and then get prepared for the worst. That's all you really can do.
You cut the breasts off a little girl, you should go to prison, of course, to perform...
But this doesn't happen, so thank God.
Medically unnecessary hysterectomy on a little girl, you should be in prison.
Yeah, but this doesn't happen, so thank God.
I mean, I assume you're going to get every Republican vote for this.
You know, I should have every single Republican co-sponsor, but unfortunately...
Yeah, shockingly, on your pro-child abuse bill, you should, because all the Republican Party doesn't give a fuck about actually protecting children. True.
I don't yet. I only have 5 co-sponsors. I'm talking to all of my colleagues and urging them, because, Tucker, let me tell you something.
What an L.
This is a referendum on the Republican Party. When we take back the majority, if the American people elect us, we have a lot of work to do. Not only do we need to impeach Merrick Garland, we need to clean out the corrupt FBI. We need to hold the Democrats accountable and defund all of their climate garbage. 87.
Yeah, so these are the real problems. Thank God. Holy shit. We got the real problems on deck. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's here to save the day. You know, these are the people we need in office. The big problems of the day, they're going to impeach Merrick Garland if they take back power, the current Attorney General in the United States in the Biden administration. For what? For doing his job. They're going to try to clean out the corrupt people in the FBI for investigating alleged crimes committed by the former president, because that's bad somehow that a former president might be held to account for committing crime. For defunding their climate garbage after literally, I've started this segment staring literal mass migration that's going to happen if we do nothing from these southern states states like Georgia, like Alabama, like Texas, like Florida, a bunch of people are going to end up moving to different states here because this shit ain't going to be fun to live in. Really focusing on the important stuff. And, you know, for the people who don't have the money to leave, you're just going to get condemned to death by the Republican Party because that's what they have on offer for you.
1,000 IRS army, but there's one thing.
Yeah, you got to deal with the 87,000 IRS army that are literally tasked with making sure the rich don't cheat their taxes so that we can actually fund a variety of social welfare programs to make it so that the people that Marjorie Taylor Greene hate and Republicans hate vociferously, the poor, the not well-to-do, the disabled, the elderly, actually have a shot at having a decent quality of life because Republicans hate all of those groups. Can't have that, of course.
We have got to do, and we're not even a party worth deserving of the American people's votes.
True! And I think we'll leave it there. That's actually true. The only way Republicans can win is by weaponizing these culture war issues, by weaponizing the humanity of trans people in order to get votes so that they can literally do nothing for the American people and actually exacerbate conditions that make the American people suffer more. The only way they get votes is by gerrymandering the fuck out of their districts to make sure that they literally cannot lose, by doing all manner of voter suppression because they know historically the less people vote, the lower turnout is for voting, the more likely a Republican is going to win, the higher the turnout, the more likely a Democrat's going to win. They're going to use the Moore v. Harper case with this activist Supreme Court and make it so essentially red states could just hand the election to the Republican candidate for president in the future because of the independent state legislature doctrine. This is the only way they can win because they don't have any actual policy for you. They've got nothing. So, of course, the bill that Marjorie Taylor Greene has brought up is a ban on care and forced detransition for trans teens. It bans insurance coverage for adult trans healthcare as well. So it's not just about the children. They want to ban trans healthcare for literally everybody because they don't want trans people to exist. Bans higher education accreditation from teaching trans healthcare. Aaron Green goes on to say, its aim is to detransition as many people, including adults, as possible by removing insurance coverage, targeting people who teach how to care for trans people and more. This would even bar psychology programs from teaching to recommend gender-affirming care to trans people. The bill is 100% genocide, literally definitionally as well. We've gone over this in previous videos. It would bar EMTs from learning about how to care for trans people. It would bar therapists from recommending the best medical care and the literal standards of care, the medical consensus. It would bar medical schools from teaching surgeons and endocrinologists. It's genocidal and eliminationist to its core. That's literally it. If you want to see who the Republican Party is, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a really good representative of that because she doesn't know how to keep the mask on. The mask always is slipping with her. She's talking about Jewish space lasers. She's minimizing the Holocaust. She's speaking at neo-Nazi conferences. She is currently pushing this pro-child abuse bill. Like, she is the Republican Party. Donald Trump as well. Really difficult to keep the mask on with that guy. If you want to know who it is, if you don't know why you have to be fucking motivated to organize, not even just electorally, but outside of the electoral system as well, against Republicans and conservatives, here you go. Here's some more information for you. Maybe get you moving on that. For those who aren't catching it, the Affordable Care Act money goes to private insurers. Employers use this money to subsidize. If they bar ACA subsidization, employers will no longer offer the plans. So in addition to this absolute fucking lunacy and promotion of child abuse from the Republican Party and conservatives and transphobes in general, apparently the group Moms for Liberty, which is actively banning books across the country, terrorizing queer kids, and taking over school boards, is calling for LGBTQ kids to be put in separate classrooms, quote, like kids with autism and Down syndrome. They want to other trans youth and LGBTQ youth to the point of putting them in separate classes. The reasons why kids with autism and Down syndrome and other learning difficulties, educational difficulties, will be put in separate classrooms is usually because it allows those kids to get the more targeted, specialized care and education that they need in order to get the most out of the education system. That's one of the reasons for these separate classes to happen, because with how underfunded the education system is in the United States, public education in specific, because Republicans want to defund public education as much as they can, because they want to be able to indoctrinate your kids and propagandize to them and whitewash history. There's going to be too many kids for one teacher to, have to teach already. So if there are any kids that have special needs when it comes to education, like those with autism or Down syndrome, sucks to suck, I guess, if you're those kids, unless you have that specialized care at these schools. So they want to put LGBTQ kids in separate classrooms, maybe not in the same classrooms, maybe in their own, and do essentially segregation 2.0, except instead of it being white and black and brown people being separated, it's going to be queer people and non-queer people, I guess. And for what benefit? Who the fuck knows? Literally just to cause more people to suffer. That's literally it. So let's see what absolute deranged lunacy we have here.
Kids that do have they're confused or they are gay or whatnot, that the way that they're trying to go about it is to make it an open conversation, an open thing in classrooms. But like, for example, children with autism, Down syndrome, they have to have special IEP meetings with a counselor. They have to be put into separate classrooms. And I understand because it's a different type of education for children with those disabilities, but I think that for children that identify differently, there should also be like a specialized something for them so that they feel that they're important enough that they're being counseled.
And why not have that conversation that you're explaining in front of everyone?
Like, literally, to what benefit? If you understand that kids with autism or Down syndrome get specialized education, and that's why they have different classes than those without those learning difficulties, what are we just assuming that, LGBTQ youth also have learning difficulties? No, they don't. They put this nice little, veneer of, oh, well, we want to make it so that the LGBTQ youth, they're like actually represented and they're cared for. They don't. They want queer people away from their kids, even though they might have queer kids and their kids are fucking scared to death to come out to their parents because they know they'll get abused by fucking reprehensible demons like this, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc., etc. They're gonna put that little veneer over it, like, oh my, we just care so much about queer kids. They just want to separate them because they don't want their kids to understand that queer people exist, and that's okay. Because they don't think it's okay. They don't think it's okay for queer people to exist in general, and they don't want their kids to be exposed to that. The reason why is because exposure to people that are different from you is a good way for you to learn more about people that are different from you and makes you less likely to be bigoted against them, right? This is why major metropolitan centers, big cities, are more likely to be socially progressive because there's a higher diversity of people. You know more people that are black, brown, queer, whatever, and you're less and less likely to be bigoted against them because you understand that they're just people like anyone else. You see them live their lives like everybody else. There's nothing different there. There's nothing scary there. There's no major differences at all. And you go about your fucking day. They don't want that because they want to be able to push to their kids that being queer is wrong, and they don't want them to get in any other alternative viewpoint.
I think for the same reason why teachers wouldn't just bring a child with autism in front of the class and be like, hey, he's got autism. Embarrassment.
But what is in your eyes?
What teacher is bringing up a student and is like, yo, this kid is gay? What are you talking about? It's like these made up scenarios. Like this mom is like doing fucking crack or something and like passes out and has these dreams and visions about these things happening and then like thinks that this is actually happening in the real world. It's not happening, man. What are you talking about? Like, these people are delusional.
Embarrassment.
But what is in your eyes embarrassing about being gay?
It's not that it's something to be embarrassed about, but I'm sure that you understand a lot of kids that are young and feel gay, some of them are shamed.
Because of people like you fucking bitch. What are you talking about? It's like, oh my god, the kids, the queer people, they gotta be in different classes because you don't want to be embarrassed. And the reason why they're embarrassed is because I literally want to put them in another fucking class other them to all of the other kids. You know how historically the special needs kids, the people in those specialized classes, are historically made fun of by shitty kids in school? They are otherized to the point where people will make fun of them. It's almost like the call is coming from inside the fucking house on this one. Jesus Christ, man. I don't know how you get these people back into reality. I don't know how you do it. Like, the indoctrination and propaganda they've been subject to by the conservatives in this country is so fucking fierce that you produce people like this and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Some of them are shamed.
Because they feel talk about it in their classroom.
Right, which I understand, but... there's just a way to go about it. That everybody is respected.
Yeah, so it is true. This is literally why school board meetings and getting elected to positions on the school board is very important for the left to be engaging in. Because these are the kinds of people that are making decisions in these schools, that are playing a part in making these decisions. Like, you're smoking a crack pipe, having visions of fucking delusion, and then thinking that's actually happening in reality, and then trying to change the way a school works. Like, what are we doing here? You should absolutely be going to your school board meetings and advocating in favor of literally the medical and scientific consensus on this shit. Advocating in favor of the education for these kids about a variety of topics that people like this don't want them to learn about because it hurts their feelings or something. It's incredibly important because you can't have people like this making major decisions in schools. That's ridiculous. There's no shot. So we touched on this in a previous video. This was about the Florida Board of Medicine ruling that people getting Medicaid, you can't be getting trans healthcare, essentially. I unfortunately didn't see this tweet in that segment. I'm going to bring it up here. She says, I need to emphasize something here. Part of this rulemaking by the Florida Board of Medicine will be to require all trans adults who receive hormones for the purpose of transition to sign a waiver full of bullshit. That waiver is transmitted to the Florida Department of Health, which would essentially create a government list of trans people. So not only do they want queer kids to have separate classes and be segregated from non-queer kids, aka in their eyes, normal kids, they also want to have a list of all trans people in Florida. You know, I don't know that I need to tell you, if you're watching my content, why that's not really the best idea. You know, if they're going so far as to claim that giving people trans healthcare, following the standards of care, medical and scientific consensus when it comes to trans healthcare, if you're going to call that a Class C felony, and then in Florida they're trying to create a list of trans people, well, there you go. There's your list of people to arrest. The people who are caring for them as well as the people doing it. Reminds me of a list the Germans created back in the 1930s. Well, surely we can't draw any comparisons to, the Germany in the 1930s. No way, that would be an overreaction. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she recently visited the Holocaust Museum and then went on to speak at a neo-Nazis conference, so she knows. So, of course, the literal incarnation of the devil himself, if he is this, if he does exist and he is this like evil person who wants everybody to suffer, the Republican Party personified. We got Ron DeSantis saying on Glenn Beck's show, I don't know why the fuck you go on Glenn Beck's show. Man has not been relevant in a long time. Quote, if a 14-year-old can't get a tattoo, that child should not be able to take puberty blockers and mutilate their body by getting a sex change. Gender-affirming care is a euphemism for disfiguring kids. But, given the overturn of Roe v. Wade and the anti-abortion laws, the pro-forced birth laws, those 14-year-olds, if they're the victims of rape, because they always would be, they're getting pregnant by a fucking adult, they're certainly old enough to be able to carry that baby to term. That's Ron DeSantis' position on the matter. Goes on to talk about all manner of bullshit, but I wanted to look at Eli Elrich's tweet thread on it. She has recently been the target of people like Matt Walsh of Chaya Raichik, the owner of the Libs of TikTok account. She was also one of the first people to break the news that Matt Walsh was making what ended up becoming the quote-unquote What is a Woman documentary, which essentially misled trans people into thinking they were going to be part of a pro-trans documentary and got, unfortunately, some of them to do that. Eli was one of the early people to sniff that out and post about it earlier on. So we got horrific misinformation. Not going to watch the video because, why should we? Let's debunk DeSantis' claims. First, Sweden did not ban trans minors from care. This is a lie. One hospital there now refuses trans care to those under 16. Staff followed a, quote, precautionary rule based on legal fear, not data. He also went on to cite an quote-unquote 80% desistance statistic. So that statistic comes from Kenneth Zucker's long since debunked research. He's grouping in boys that like pink with trans kids saying, quote, I am a girl. This is the absolute scientific rigor, the analysis of transphobes and conservatives, and what constitutes good data to the Republican Party. A boy saying, I like the color pink, which is going to be seen in our society as a kind of gender non-conforming thing, to trans kids literally saying, I am a girl or whatever, right? Actual desistance is regularly reported to be between 1 and 2.5%, incredibly low. Also, Trans care is not experimental. Another common talking point you'll hear from these absolute fucking ghouls, that it's experimental and there's not a lot of history. There is a lot of history behind it. You know, we keep talking about Germany in the 30s and whatnot, and we might as well keep talking about them. Some of the first books that the Nazis burned was from the Institute of Sexual Health, which was founded by a gay Jewish man, where all manner of trans healthcare was logged. The first vaginoplasty was performed there. The first books the Nazis burned was about trans and gender-related healthcare. Trans care is not experimental. We have over 90 years of science on medical transition of adults and minors. The book, The Transsexual Phenomenon, even became a 1966 bestseller studying the benefits and side effects of hormone therapy and surgery. Nobody is giving 14-year-olds bottom surgery, nor is that the only trans surgery. Bottom surgery options typically start around age 16 on a case-by-case basis. The regret rate is under 1%. If you look at the regret rate for a variety of other procedures, like I believe hip replacements have a higher regret rate. It's literally all lies. That's the opposition that we have. And unfortunately, because of the participation trophy that is the Electoral College, that is gerrymandering, that is voter suppression, the Republicans are able to maintain power in our government and push their delusions onto everybody else. Continuing along, Florida added puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and gender reassignment surgery as, quote, not medically necessary to treat gender dysphoria. It will pull all Floridians who receive hormone therapy off of their coverage for their medication. This is trans adults. So they'll consistently fearmonger about kids, but they also don't want trans adults to be able to get any kind of gender-related care because they don't want trans people to exist. The new rule change goes into effect on August 21st. It's specifically for Medicaid, although private insurers often will refer to Medicaid to determine what is medically necessary for them to cover. Also, tangentially, the ACLU is now going to be suing Florida over the Stop Woke Act that Ron DeSantis recently signed, which severely restricts discussions of race and gender in college and university classrooms. So the Don't Say Gay bill and related anti-CRT moral panic that they were talking about until they realized that weaponizing the humanity of trans people was far more lucrative for them. They always talk about, oh, the kids, they can't be learning this, the kids. It's also people in college and university. Young adults and adults. They're trying to bar from being able to learn anything about the actual history of this country, the actual science as it pertains to gender and sex being different, and all manner of things related to that. They go on to say, it's simple, this unconstitutional censorship law will have a chilling effect on freedom of expression in higher education. So, for the longest time, absolute fucking idiots like Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, etc., all these people, Jordan Peterson, who have been super excited to go to college campuses to speak and, debate unprepared college kids and pretend that they've won, even though that they are almost always wrong about what they're talking about. It's just that the people they're debating are literally, it's like man on the street type shit. They're talking about, oh my God, all this, liberal colleges, they're indoctrinating the youth or whatever. And these snowflakes, they want safe spaces. They're so afraid of differing opinions. College is supposed to be where you're supposed to go to get your ideas challenged, to hear opinions that differ from yours. You silly little snowflakes. Well, it turns out the call was coming from the inside of the house on that one as well, because these snowflakes who can't deal with the actual history of the founding of this country as it pertains to critical race theory at a collegiate level, because that's when that is taught, as well as the scientific and medical consensus on the difference between gender and sex and other related topics, they're too pussy to hear about that shit because it makes them uncomfortable because they're fucking bitches. So they're trying to ban that as well in Florida because Ron DeSantis' tiny little limp dick needs to get elected. Florida lawmakers are trying to impose restrictions on teaching or even expressing views they disagree with. The law is also incredibly vague, just like the Don't Say Gay bill was, making it nearly impossible for educators to know what exactly falls under it. The First Amendment protects the right to learn for educators and students. The Stop Woke Act deprives classrooms of important learning tools and conversations to challenge racism and sexism and discriminates against black educators and students, which is literally the stated goal of the Republican Party. To promote racism, to promote sexism, and to discriminate against anybody who isn't a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Okay? Very simple. The Republican Party is a white supremacist party. That's the ultimate goal. When they say they're originalists when it pertains to the Constitution, they mean it literally. They want to go back to the conditions of this country's founding. When black and brown people were slaves, women were second-class citizens and the property of their husbands and fathers, where white men would get power simply for being white men. Also back when child labor was, allowed. This is what they want. That's what the party is. And this idea that we need to pretend that there's any kind of good ideas on both sides and there's this marketplace of ideas that we have to worry about is fucking stupid. Don't be a fucking idiot. I am literally not telling you anything that you don't already know. You already understand all of this. You've seen throughout your history, even if you're fairly young, that the Republican Party literally never pushes for anything that would actually help any people in the United States of America. They actually push for shit that makes things worse. They push for the fucking country and the Earth's climate getting so bad that when you get older, you're going to suffer even more because of their inaction, because they got to get money from the fossil fuel companies and do their goddamn bidding. They're going to just demonize queer, black, brown people to get votes from their uneducated base. It's very clear. It's plain as day. They are literally telling you who they are. I feel like I'm coming off in this segment with less patience than I might in previous segments because I'm just talking about the same shit over and over again. Because every single goddamn day, there's some new fucking stupid bullshit from the Republican Party, from conservatives, some made-up fucking delusions that they've had in like a fever dream one day, that they're trying to push onto everybody else because they're uncomfortable with the actual world we live in. And it gets a little boring. And, the only thing I can really do at this point to spice it up is be a little fucking aggro about it, I guess. So at least it's good that the ACLU is suing Florida over that. Hopefully, something good comes of this. Also, along the lines of conservatives not being the biggest fans of stopping child abuse, we've got, in Texas, this is from the Houston Chronicle, a flood of 2,300 departing workers leave Texas Child Welfare Agency scrambling, quote, absolutely a crisis. So nearly 2,300 employees have left the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services since the beginning of the year, stressing an agency that has already experienced some of the highest turnover rates of any large state department. Article goes on to say, of the 2,267 employees who left the agency by August 3rd, about 83% of them had quit, the highest voluntary exit rate the department has seen since it became an independent agency in fall 2017. Quote, the focus has been taken so far away from child safety that I don't want to do this job anymore, said a current Houston area caseworker. The worker, like the others quoted in the article, spoke on condition of anonymity, saying they feared repercussions for discussing the agency's internal problems. Another said she quit because of unmanageable workloads and pressure to close multiple cases a day, even though she believed more investigation was needed. Several others said they were offended by Governor Greg Abbott's order to launch child abuse investigations into families of transgender children, literally creating more work over a non-problem, stressing an agency that is already overworked to the point where now 2,300 of them have fucking left. Meaning that if you actually gave a fuck about protecting children, you probably wouldn't be doing what Greg Abbott is doing in Texas, because you've essentially just created conditions that led to the gutting of your fucking child protection agency, and now less and less children are going to be protected because there's less and less people doing the work to do that. You fucking piece of shit. You absolute loser. These people don't care. They like it when children are abused. That's it. That's it. Republicans, conservatives, they don't care. They're either complacent in the abuse of children or they like it. That's it. See also Marjorie Taylor Greene. See also Greg Abbott. See also Ron DeSantis. See also Matt Gaetz. See also everybody else in the Republican Party. But we're not done yet. An hour into this segment, we're finally moved on to the next part of it. Vice News has recently reported from August 17, 2022, far-right extremists are threatening to, quote, execute doctors at a children's hospital. Thank the fucking Lord above. So much shit happening in this country, but we're really focusing on the real matter at hand, which is threatening doctors at a children's hospital. If you needed any other evidence that these people are literally just evil pieces of shit that want people to suffer, here you go. I can think of nothing more heinous than threatening the doctors at a children's hospital. The viral Twitter account Libs of TikTok promoted a lie about gender-affirming care at the hospital, and now doctors are getting death threats. Boston Children's Hospital said on Tuesday that its staff has faced a flood of violent threats and harassment sparked by a false claim made by the viral Libs of TikTok Twitter account. The account, run by Brooklyn real estate agent Shia Raichik, tweeted on August 11th that, quote, Boston Children's Hospital is now offering gender-affirming hysterectomies for young girls. The claim has been widely debunked by fact-checking groups, shockingly. You know, a right-winger just lying? No way. But as is typical in anti-trans rhetoric, facts rarely matter, and the claims were shared widely on right-wing social media accounts. As a result, the hospital and its staff have faced a torrent of abuse. Quote, in response to commentary last week critical of our gender multi-specialty service program, Boston Children's Hospital has been the target of a large volume of hostile internet activity, phone calls, and harassing emails, including threats of violence toward our clinicians and staff, the hospital said in a statement posted to Twitter. So the actual hospital had to put out a statement about it. This is having real world ramifications. It's not just some online shit. The hospital did not specify where the threats were coming from, but Vice News has uncovered some violent threats posted on far-right and extremist platforms targeting the doctors. Quote, long past time to start executing these doctors. A member of a pro-Trump message board, formerly known as the Donald, wrote under a copy of a video featuring a doctor from the hospital. This message board is the same one whose members last week doxed and made violent threats against the judge who signed the search warrant that allowed the FBI to search the home of former President Donald Trump. The forum's members encouraged one another to post negative remarks on the hospital's YouTube videos, which were ultimately removed as a result of an influx of comments. Another member posted the phone number of the hospital and encouraged others to call them on the phone. So, you know, if this hospital is getting called for things that, you know, a hospital would normally get called for, well, the lines might be a little clogged from absolute fucking degenerate losers on the internet who are afraid of the idea that children are getting health care. There were similar reactions to the claims in far-right and conspiracy-minded Telegram groups. Quote, demons like this do not deserve to breathe. Crimes against humanity equals death, one Telegram user wrote under a link to one of the articles featuring the false claims. Quote, these people are psychopaths and should be locked up, another wrote. On both platforms, the doctors and hospital staff were referred to as, quote, pedophiles and, quote, groomers, attacks that have become a mainstay of Republican orthodoxy in recent months. By the way, the use of the term groomers like this has literally been called out by groups that are trying to stop child abuse, trying to stop child trafficking, telling these people to stop misusing the term in this way because it's literally making it harder for them to do their job and protect kids. Republicans, right-wingers, conservatives don't care if kids are abused. Raichik's account, which has over 1 million followers, has been at the forefront of the right's anti-LGBTQ campaign, which has also targeted schools and libraries in the recent months. Also, somehow still allowed to operate on Twitter completely unchecked. Sometimes they catch a mute here and there. Not much going on other than that. Twitter kind of being pussies about this one. It's the same tactic that has been deployed for years by anti-abortion groups and is still being used in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Twitter did not immediately respond to Vice News' request for comment on whether Raichik's latest tweet broke its rules, because they're fucking pussies. That's the simple fact of the matter. We've done videos before on Libs of TikTok. The entire account is literally just stochastic terrorism, the account. They post the dates and addresses of a variety of LGBTQ events. They post the docs and information of a variety of doctors, offices, phone numbers, a lot of these which could be publicly available. But the big problem with them posting them is because they routinely also tag on there the fact that they think that these people are groomers, pedophiles, child abusers, and it's an implicit call for violence. It's what it is. We've seen this happen before, actually. Some of you might not know, but if you're like a Zoomer or younger in the audience, Tiller the baby killer, quote unquote, might be familiar to you otherwise. So, Dr. George Tiller was a doctor who performed abortion in Wichita, Kansas. Bill O'Reilly made a lot of hay out of talking about Dr. George Tiller. Fox News Channel commentator Bill O'Reilly has also been accused of demonizing Tiller. O'Reilly was found to have mentioned Tiller by name on The O'Reilly Factor, his show on the Fox News Channel, 42 separate times prior to Tiller's death, referring to him specifically as a, quote, baby killer in 24 instances. So Fox News, one of the most watched news sources on TV, and Bill O'Reilly, who was an incredibly popular host, was regularly accusing this guy of murder to the point where, eventually, Scott Roeder, an absolute piece of shit, an anti-abortion extremist, fucking killed him, assassinated him. Tiller was killed during a Sunday morning service at his church, Reformation Lutheran Church, where he was serving as an usher. Tiller had previously survived an assassination attempt in 1993 when Shelley Shannon shot him in the arms. Roeder was arrested within 3 hours of the shooting and charged with first-degree murder and related crimes 2 days later. In November 2009, Roeder publicly confessed to the killing, telling the Associated Press that he had shot Tiller because, quote, preborn children's lives were in imminent danger, which is literally just a lie that he's been fed by right-wing media. And then Bill O'Reilly was fired, right? No, actually, no. Bill O'Reilly kept his job until all of the lawsuits that Bill O'Reilly was getting filed against him and Fox News by the women that worked at Fox News who accused O'Reilly of sexual misconduct in the workplace ended up becoming too costly for the network, so Fox News had to let him go. They knew that he was sexually harassing the female workers in Fox News in the studio, but they didn't care about that. They didn't fire him over that. In fact, they protected him for a while using their war chest because they love protecting abusers. And then they finally let him go when the lawsuits became too costly. Roeder was found guilty of first-degree murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault on January 29, 2010, and sentenced on April 1, 2010, to life imprisonment without any chance of parole for 50 years. The sentence was later reduced to allow the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. So we've seen how this kind of rhetoric can actually lead to real-world violence. That is stochastic terrorism. See also the Christchurch shooter citing Lauren Southern. Other manifestos that have Ben Shapiro being the perpetrator of the mass shootings most watched or engaged with social media accounts. See also the Patriot Front or Patriot Prayer, whatever the fuck, people that were stopped in a U-Haul on their way to a Pride event during Pride Month who were armed with a variety of weapons. Luckily, the police actually stopped them this time around. Turns out they didn't have enough police on their side like they normally would, like the Proud Boys would, for instance, to be able to get away with this kind of shit. So going back to the article, the claim was instantly picked up and amplified by a slew of right-wing influencers and media personalities. Quote, this is monstrous. Stephen Miller, a literal white supremacist. Like, he's even got Nazi physiognomy and phrenology. Like, come on. Others who boosted the false claim included the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh and conservative websites such as the Post-Millennial, literal rag, the Gateway Pundit, also a rag, and the Daily Caller, literally also a rag. Quote, we are deeply concerned by these attacks on our clinicians and staff fueled by misinformation and a lack of understanding and respect for our transgender community, the hospital said. The article and the online attention that followed was based on the incorrect statements that Boston Children's performs hysterectomies on minors in connection with transgender care, because they don't. As has been pointed out in several fact checks about the claims, in order for a hysterectomy to be performed as part of gender-affirming care, Boston Children's Hospital requires a patient to be capable of consenting for themselves. Quote, Boston Children's does not and will not perform a hysterectomy as part of gender-affirming care on a patient under the age of 18, the hospital said in its statement. Despite the outrage about the targeted harassment campaign against Boston Children's Hospital, the staff, RightChick, on Tuesday posted a similar incendiary tweet targeting Phoenix Children's Hospital because, you know, why stop it harassing and pushing people to threaten and harass the workers at one children's hospital when you could also target another children's hospital because these people care so much about protecting children. Quote, how many more children's hospitals and their providers need to be threatened before you actually do something? Alejandra Caraballo, a clinical instructor at the Harvard Law School Cyber Law Clinic, an LGBTQI+ advocate who has been at the forefront of calling out RightChick's campaign, tweeted on Tuesday. So just for some extra information about Boston Children's Hospital, the first target here when it comes to children's hospitals, at least in this particular story, it's a nationally ranked freestanding acute care children's hospital located in Boston, Massachusetts. It's home to the largest hospital-based pediatric research program in the world. And Boston Children's Hospital has been ranked as best pediatric medical center by U.S. News and World Report more times than any other hospital, and is currently ranked as the best children's hospital in the United States. Certainly, they might know a thing or two more than dumb fuck Chaya Raichik, failed realtor, about pediatric care. Like, come on, man. What are you doing? How can you be on the side of harassing literally the best children's hospital in the United States and still think you're on the good side? Still think you're the good guys? Jesus Christ. So, of course, we've got absolute chincel. Beards are literally just makeup for men, and Matt Walsh is the prime example of that. Matt Walsh here. Media Matters put out a tweet. The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh falsely accused Boston Children's Hospital of putting, quote, every toddler who has ever been born on a path to sterilization and butchery before they can even talk. 2 days later, the hospital staff was deluged by violent threats. Literally stochastic terrorism. So let's see this neat little comparison that they put up. Literally based on a lie.
Today on the Matt Walsh Show, children's hospitals around the country are butchering, mutilating, and sterilizing their young patients.
So it's not happening. Have you seen this video? Not happening. Just a lie. Just not truth at all. Alternate reality that these people have to engage with because it makes them money. For Matt Walsh, anyway. And when it comes to politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene, gets them elected.
According to Boston Children's Hospital, literally every toddler who has ever been born or will ever be born is trans.
I can guarantee that's also not the case, but okay.
Now, if it seems like they're casting the widest imaginable net in order to catch the most children they can and put them all on a path to sterilization and butchery before they can even talk,
which doesn't happen.
Well, that's because that's exactly what these monsters are doing.
But it's not, luckily. Thank God. Thank the Lord above.
And they've done it up until this moment without much resistance.
And they haven't gotten much resistance because it's literally not happening. And the medical and scientific insistence and the standards of care as it pertains to trans healthcare contradict the worldview of Matt Walsh. This is why there hasn't been any pushback, because they're not doing anything wrong.
But that has to end. We have to stop making it so easy on them. And that's why I'm in the very early stages of trying to organize a national coordinated effort to fight back against this evil.
Yeah, the evil of literally the best children's hospital in the United States from rendering care to its patients. What an evil thing that this crusade has to be waged against.
You know, it's really just a matter of where do we begin? Maybe we begin at Boston Children's Hospital.
Boston Children's Hospital says its staff is being threatened and harassed now after far-right activists on social media posted misinformation claiming they perform gender-affirming hysterectomy procedures on young girls. The hospital says it's not true. They do not perform those procedures for anyone under the age of 18. Boston Children's Hospital says it is proud, though, to be home to the first pediatric and adolescent transgender health program in the United States. The hospital, though, now is working with law enforcement to try to better protect its staff in the face of these lies.
Literally, the doctors and staff here have had to have extra security because of this. Like, not to mention the person who attacked the FBI office with a nail gun because of the lies that the Republicans are pushing about the FBI literally just doing their job and trying to get classified documents back from a former president. We already know that the Republican Party's base has members in it that are willing to do violence. See also the January 6th attempted coup on our nation's capital to get Donald Trump back in power after he lost an election. They're very well aware of the fact that they have absolute fucking lunatics in their base, because they are also fucking degenerate lunatics, that will be willing to go out and do violence in the name of their ideology, being provoked by literal lies and indoctrination to do so. And they will lose their own lives as well, as we saw on January 6th, as we saw when that dude fucking attacked that FBI office with a nail gun. The idea that libs of TikTok and Matt Walsh are continuing to operate and are allowed to continue to operate on Twitter, and I would say also on YouTube for Matt Walsh, is patently absurd. Anybody with any actual reasonable thought process can kind of put two and two together. They've seen how in the past, these lies, these easily falsifiable lies that have been pushed by these people have led to murder, have led to violence. We can kind of stop that from happening if we actually put pedal to the metal and get these motherfuckers off these programs and make them have a smaller and smaller megaphone. You know, if you're wondering if deplatforming works, then how about you tell me how Milo's media career is doing? A lot of you might be asking, Milo who? And exactly, motherfucker. Milo Yiannopoulos, famous ex-gay now, neo-Nazi, who was massive during Gamergate, went on like all manner of news publications, got a lot of media clout. Then he got banned off of literally everything for being a neo-Nazi and also, child abuse advocate. And now nobody gives a shit. He had to say that he's ex-gay now and like dresses like the Tiger King in order to get clout. That's the levels he's sunk into. And I think Marjorie Taylor Greene also hired him, funnily enough. So here we have Alejandra Caraballo's post, essentially just detailing the absolute psychopathic fixation that Chaya Raichik of Lives at TikTok has had about Boston Children's Hospital, which has led to all manner of death threats as we've seen, and led to Boston Children's Hospital having to make a statement about it. So I feel like we're kind of all over the place in this segment. I gotta wrap it up quickly though. But you might be wondering, and I've already kind of gone over this, but here's another example. Why do these people continue to be transphobic in this way? It's abundantly clear, as per scientific medical consensus, etc., 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 all of the debunked claims that they put out, all of the actual reality being put forward, contradicting what right-wingers say. Why do they keep saying it? Well, as I've written here, the transphobia industrial complex keeps on chugging. So this is from Mimium on Twitter. They say, to understand the full picture of why anti-LGBT and especially anti-trans hate has increased in the UK. So this is the UK, you know, Turf Island. The US, not much better. You only need to look at the trans-hostile UK mainstream media. So check this out. 13,015, the number of articles published in the UK news media on trans topics between 2015 and 2022. 154, the average number of articles published every month by the UK media on trans topics over the last 7 years. And this, by the way, excludes LGBT media, being pro-LGBT media. 501, the number of articles published in UK news media on trans topics in May 2022. That's over 16 articles a day. 163, the number of articles published by the Daily Mail on trans topics in May 2022. That's more than 5 per day. The reason why they do this, you know, the reason why Dave Chappelle is super transphobic on the timeline now and in his specials, Ricky Gervais as well, is because it's lucrative. It's making money. It gets the clicks. Because the humanity of trans people has been weaponized the world over to great effect in terms of attaining political power, in terms of making money, well, why wouldn't a bunch of different news publications continue to push stories about trans people bordering on, you know, both sidesing one side, the right wing, wanting to just, you know, eliminate trans people, and the other side being like, yo, they're completely wrong on everything they say, and it's actually good that trans people get the care they need. Somehow that's presented as like an equal, you know, both sides of the same argument, marketplace of ideas type beat. Or it's just outright transphobic. It's just a lot of money to be made being transphobic on the timeline. But I suppose to end on a more positive note, here is a study from February 25th, 2022, from the JMA Network. Mental health outcomes in transgender and non-binary youths receiving gender-affirming care. So if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, you've heard all of this before. But here's another one. Key points. Question: is gender-affirming care for transgender and non-binary youths associated with changes in depression, anxiety, and suicidality? So the right wing would say yes, but that it makes those things worse. Turns out, in this study, findings in this prospective cohort of 104 trans and non-binary youths aged 13 to 20 years, receipt of gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and gender-affirming hormones, was associated with 60% lower odds of moderate or severe depression and 73% lower odds of suicidality over a 12-month follow-up. So, if you would like it for children to not suffer as much, if you would be in the interest of protecting children, well, if the youth you're talking about here is trans, turns out that they become less depressed and less suicidal after receiving gender-affirming care. Shockingly, right? It's almost like there's a medical and scientific consensus on this. You know, it's almost like the standards of care are this for a reason. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just maybe be a little silly here. Meaning, this study found that access to gender-affirming care was associated with mitigation of mental health disparities among trans and non-binary youths over 1 year, given this population's high rates of adverse mental health outcomes, mostly the product of the fact that their local community, their parents, etc., are incredibly abusive and transphobic to them. These data suggest that access to pharmacological interventions may be associated with improved mental health among trans and non-binary youths over a short period. Wow. I'll leave a link in the description of this study if you'd like to see yet another one disproving the narrative on the right wing, because we do that ad nauseum on this channel because it's really easy to do. Additionally, Aaron in the Morn, like I say, will completely shout out Aaron Reed. You should all go follow. Always on the ball with this kind of shit. A W in Utah. Utah sports ban has been enjoined and transgender people can go back to playing sports. So we had the worst year of trans legislation ever. Courts are siding with trans rights. And this is in Utah. Utah's no liberal haven, okay? This comes just after a cis girl was investigated on suspicion of being trans. So there was a story that, I don't know if it was Utah specifically, but there was a story that came out where like some parents or something were mad about the fact that this other child was doing very well in children's sports. So they're like, oh my God, they're probably a boy. Like this is a trans girl. It turns out, no, that's not the case. But these fucking pussy ass, living vicariously through their children ass, no hope for their future ass, fucking squandered childhood, peaked in middle school ass parents, who are salty about their kid not performing as well as they would hope in sports, have decided that, oh, it's the trans people. You know, you stub your toe, trans people. Your wife cheats on you with someone more attractive than you, trans people. Temperatures are going up across the country, trans people. It's always trans people somehow, because these people are literally mentally ill, and transphobia is a mental illness. I'll say it. I've said this before. I feel like it could be inducted into the DSM-6. The amount of psychopathy that results from people dabbling in and then going further into transphobic narratives, the amount of reality-bending delusion you have to engage with, and the way that it seems to consume their fucking lives once they've gotten into it, I feel like you could have a very strong case to be made that it is actually, you know, a mental illness and these people need fucking therapy. These people need to be helped. Also, huge news for transgender students in the federal ruling out of Montgomery County, Maryland. A U.S. District Court has ruled that the 14th Amendment does not require schools to disclose transgender students' gender identity to students' parents. Trans youth deserve agency. So the reason why this would be pretty cringe if it was the case is that it would essentially allow for the parents who are, in this case, like any parent who wants to know if another student is trans is just transphobic. Like, they're scared of their child knowing that trans people exist. They've bought into the fake lies about, you know, trans people being dangerous or some shit. So it would allow those parents to know about that, and then it would allow those parents to go to school board meetings or whatever and try to advocate for and further oppress these kids that are just trying to live their lives. So cool that U.S. District Court ruled that the 14th Amendment does not require schools to disclose transgender students' gender identity to students' parents. In this ruling out of Montgomery County, Maryland. Very nice. Making it harder for these absolute psychopaths to target and oppress trans people and kids every single goddamn day. There are currently several such cases making their way through courts around the country. In Florida and Massachusetts, similar lawsuits have been filed in order to establish some sort of quote-unquote right for parents to automatically be told when their kid is trans. This judge says no. This case is near and dear to my heart, as this is my own district. This is the district my child will grow up in. I know transgender youth in this district, and I know how much teachers care for them. This is such wonderful news. Very good, very nice, very good, very nice. So there is some hope out there. Things are moving in a positive direction in some ways, and also in a negative in others. So while this entire segment has been overwhelmingly filled with negative bullshit because that's all the Republicans have, it's also getting pretty, hopium pilled out there in some other places too. So I try to end these on a good note because it's a lot of bullshit and I know it's tiring to hear it all the goddamn time. This is also why I sprinkle in different content in my coverage as well, because I don't want it to just be, me bitching about transphobes being dumbasses all the goddamn time. So I hope you enjoy that as well. And yeah, I don't know. Hopefully these absolute fucking lunatics on the right, get their comeuppance at some point, surely, in the form of electoral consequence, right? They lose their election or go to jail. Because I mean, like I say, the FBI, the communist FBI is looking into a lot of these people when it comes to January 6th and a variety of branching paths related to it. And a lot of these people also asked for preemptive pardons that we've talked about today from Donald Trump after January 6th. Who knows? Could be cool. Anyway, I don't know how to end this. This video is content called Sean Dixon. Thank you tremendously for continuing to engage with my content, as well as being a premier Yellow Name Association card-carrying official member in my website live stream chat room. If you'd like to be the next Connor Call It, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter @ConnorCC, retweet my video links when they go live, same as it always is. Remember to subscribe to the channel, put all notifications on, and hit the bell. Leave a like if you'd like. Comment something down below about how maybe these transphobes should, become addicted to Roblox and spend all their time playing that game instead of trying to make trans people's lives as hard as possible, and have a great day.